already have Composer installed on my Mac. Is that better? So Composer has two types of require. You have development dependencies and production dependencies. So Composer require without the dash dev, like this. So you have this one and you have and Composer in its JSON file contains your development dependencies and your production dependencies. So your Slim framework is a production dependency. When you deploy your app out, it's going to need the framework to run. So that gets a require. Now for unit testing, if you're using PHP unit, that is not something you want in production because that's overhead. And so you would say Composer require dash dev space PHP unit slash PHP unit. But for this project 3, you don't need any development dependencies, just production dependencies. So Slim is the package, the product, the company, the development group name, and then this is the code name. So how do you know what packages that you are available for you? You go to packagist.org. And so this is the repository that Composer will pull the dependencies from. So here, for example, there's our Slim framework. If we want the development master, it's right there. Tells us what it requires, so on and so forth. If we specifically want version 2.62, then that's what we'll get. So packages.org is like, for example, if you want a log package, you can type in log and look through the packages that are available. What log system would I like to use? Well, there is an E Framework 2 logging package. So it specifically writes logs to syslog, that type of thing. So packages is where Composer pulls stuff from.
So are you saying we need to be doing this in that project folder? So once I've cloned, you want me to run Composer require Slim.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's take a look at what it's done. It's created two files, a composer.json and a composer.lock. A composer.json is the main file that drives Composer, and a composer.lock file is the file. You only want one person really adding dependencies to the project. So developers can add dependencies in their own dev environment using the composer.json file, but then they have to vet that those dependencies don't break other things in the project. Once that's vetted, then you can add it to the composer.lock file. Because when you go out to production and you pull your dependencies down on your production server, you're going to use composer.lock. So that's why it has two files. Let's take a quick look at the first one. very simple JSON. Require slim version 2.6 or greater. So we pulled down 2.6.2. Let's say tomorrow they rev slim to 2.6.3. So if you ran composer.install from the command line on Thursday after they revved it, just like that with no parameters, it will update you to 2.6.3. If you only want 2.6.2 and nothing else, get rid of the squiggly and do this. That will lock you into 2.6.2. But all of the PHP, the majority of the PHP packages on packages.org follow the semantic versioning. So if you go squiggly 2.6, you're guaranteed that whatever you're writing isn't going to break. If they don't use semantic versioning, then your guess is as good as anybody's. Let's take a look at the lock file, which is created by Composer. There's a lot of fun stuff in here, which you will not be required to know for this class. But some things is like, for example, the license is MIT for Slim. Here's the author's information right here. Here's the time and date that it was last updated. So on and so forth.
Is that updated pretty frequently?
Yeah, active groups will update frequently. So on and so forth. It gives you also the GitHub, Git URL, reference number, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of information in there that you don't have to worry about. Okay, so those are those two files. But it created a vendor directory. So let's go take a look at the vendor directory. Vendor directory gave us an autoload.php file. Let's take a quick look at that one. And what this has done is this has created an autoload file. Remember in the first project 1 and 2 how we did our own autoloader to autoload the classes, that only the classes we need and nothing else to minimize file I/O. This does the same thing for the Slim framework. So let's say we only use 3 classes out of the Slim framework. This autoloader will guarantee that we only file I/O is to open those class files and load them into memory. Then if you look at the composer, there's our class loader, namespaces. You see how slim is, right? And here's slim, so slim. You even have unit tests. Okay.
Wait, which one? The unit test?
The unit tests,
Oh, where is it?
right here.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Now, a lot of people don't do this. I do, just because I like to be sure. When I use Composer to bring in dependencies, if they have a test directory in my project build, I will run their tests. just to make sure that my dependencies are tested along with my own code. If they don't give it to you, then of course, don't spend your time going and write it. But if they have it, and you can see that Slim has its own composer.json, so it uses Composer to bring in dependencies that it needs to run its tests. Has its PHP unit, Markdown. You get an htaccess file. And it looks like it builds on Travis, which is don't worry about that. All right, so let's go ahead and let's run the hello world thing. So let's copy that person. Again, we want to do think that'll work.
You didn't make a source directory though, right?
Okay, so I made a source directory, and under source.
And you have a problem?
Oh. How did we do it? Project one. I think we had public at
It was
this
not.
level.
Yeah.
Sorry, bad habits die hard. Now that was unintentional, but I am doing an intentional thing. You guys catch it?
Maybe you didn't know.
No. Now do you know what I did intentionally like that?
Forgot to define.
Ah, I forgot to include the framework, right? So if we go back to the code, so just because Composer brought down my dependency, I still have to reference that dependency in my code. Now we want to use the autoloader, right? So this example right here is not complete. What do we need to do? Well, you can go to the user's guide, and that's what we need to do right here.
So you just want us to follow these first steps on this getting started page?
Yeah,
I just
tonight.
I can't keep up with, I'm trying.
Oh, I kind of want you to watch. You don't have
Yeah.
to be coding as I code.
Okay.
Yeah, that. Now notice we're in the public directory, right? So we're not going to be able to reach the vendor unless we go up one. But better practice would be to do the directory separator, so on and so forth. But because we're running out of time, I'm going to cheat. It also says if we're using Composer, this is all we need to do. Now let's give it a shot. Oops. Now, why did we get that? What's a 404 mean? From our discussion earlier in class. Page not found. Okay. So did a router handle this?
Yeah.
Where is the router that handled this, that turned out a nice 404 page not found?
Framework.
The framework, exactly. So, and we see here that the web server put out a invalid request. So let's go back and look at our code. So when we said app on line 4, app equals new slim, that brings in the framework. And the framework brings in the router. Think of our simple router in project 1 and 2.
Download the actual file.
But we've defined only one thing in this application. What is that? We have to have a /hello with a name. That's the only endpoint we have defined. Okay, so let me rerun this. What I mean by endpoint is we have to go /hello Chris. We can change this and say hello Chuck. Let's go back and let's put a root endpoint in. Save him.
You must like that movie, huh?
It was fun. Now here's something interesting. Let's change this guy to a post. So do you think I can do it from a browser now? No! Because a browser in the URL executes only gets. So, let me bring up my REST client. Let me create a new file so I won't mess up stuff I'm doing at work. So we go here and we say HTTP localhost 8081. Again, when I execute this, I'll get an error, right? The same error. Not found, not found. But if I change him to a post, I am grouped. So see how easy it is with the Slim framework to define your endpoints? added. I added the auth endpoint, but remember in our mock design discussion up here, we made it a post. So in the code, I made it a post. So I can't do it through the browser, I have to do it through here. And the response is, you have your control. So in that little function, anonymous function, you instantiate your controller, pass a request object to it, which you'll have to find out how to do that in the SLIM documentation. It's not too hard. And pass the request object to it, and then with that request object, you'll know, your controller will know what to do. Does that make a lot more sense now that you've gone through project 1 and 2? I don't like your head, but I like your head. Your head doesn't move, but his is.
It moves slightly.
But does that make sense?
Yeah.
And all frameworks behave along this pattern. So once you understand the pattern, you can transition to any framework in any language that's doing web applications. And in the summer class, in the .NET class, we'll see how this is done the Microsoft way. It's harder, it's uglier, but it's similar. It's easy to pick up. And then see here, we can add headers, parameters, bodies, options. We'll get into that next Monday a little bit more. But probably for this week till next Monday, you'll want to define your endpoint, what is going to be passed into it, and what is going to be response. So what type of responses, for example, are you going to have on an auth endpoint?
200.
You have a success 200. You have a 401 unauthorized,
500.
and then you have a 500. That's if something happens, like some kind of error condition handling in your controller. That's what you'd respond. Can you see a way that maybe you'd want to create a response parent object and then inherit specific responses off of that? Or maybe Slim has a response object that you can extend with your own application specific stuff. That's probably this week's work. Okay? Next week, hopefully you'll have a base endpoint up and running, receiving at least a success response, bare minimum, and returning a success, taking a request and returning a successful response. Then we'll talk about next week how to use NPM to pull down jQuery into your JavaScript object, and then how to make a jQuery AJAX call to your PHP endpoint. That's what we'll learn next week. Wednesday will be a class lab that you can collaborate with stuff. As soon as I get back from the lacrosse game, I'll send out a message saying I'm available online and I can collaborate it and answer questions that way. I don't know how, games usually end at about 6:37, and it's a good hour drive down from where we're at, so it'll probably be 8-ish by the time I'm online and available. That's what happens when you pick crappy assistants. No, I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming me. I picked crappy assistants. I should have known better. I wanted assistants who want the head coach job, who want to replace me, because I'd be. It's your job. If you want it, you got it. I put my time in. I'm done. My son's happy. He's moved up. I'm done. You'll understand that in about 16, 15 years.
I learned that a whole lot sooner than that.